So in ministry, there are a number of tasks and people for us to lead and to stay on top of and to figure out. So in this episode of Practical Church Planting, we're going to give you 6 tips for keeping people and tasks from falling through the cracks.
Thanks for joining us again today on Practical Church Planting. We're going to be giving you 6 tips for keeping people and tasks from falling through the cracks.
And for whatever reason, I feel like pastors are just notorious for not following through.
For cracks.
Yes.
For falling through, yes.
Letting things fall through the cracks.
Yeah.
Now, I always like to clarify because I always feel like there's this like Christians are the worst problem. It's like we're just the same as everybody else.
Yeah.
So this isn't like pastors, you become a pastor or you work on a church staff and you somehow are worse at this thing. A lot of people aren't great at this, but if you're leading people and you're in ministry, A, if you're leading people, you should try to avoid this. And B, if you're in ministry and you're caring for people, it's even worse if, like, it's one thing if an assignment doesn't get done. It's another thing if somebody was supposed to be followed up with and they were just ignored.
Right.
Nobody's perfect, but it just seems to be an excuse of like, we're just busy all the time. And so we let things happen that shouldn't. So the good news is you actually you can create systems to where people and things like are followed up with.
Yeah.
And so that is what this episode is for. Some things that I've done that have been helpful for me, and we'll talk about them. Hopefully some things that you might want to implement as well so that you can stay on top of things. And I would say too, especially if you're smaller and you're planting, you want to develop the habits now so that because it only will get more complex later on as you have more people and things to think through. And so now is the time to get this under control. And if there's even been a couple times where something hasn't been followed up with, don't just write it off as like that things happen. Things do not have to happen that way. So
yeah, and I'd also add if you're the church planter, pastor, whatever, and you have no staff under you, that now is the time to get this in place because your staff, I mean, they may not follow everything you do exactly, but in other words, if you're great at this, it doesn't mean that they're going to be great at this, but if you're bad at this, it's pretty unlikely that they're going to rise above you and be good at it.
And I mean, that's a good point because I've been a part of, been either serving, or I'm sure you have too, or on staff at a couple of church plants where like the leadership things weren't followed up with well, or like meetings weren't started on time, or like, and it was always because the leaders didn't do this, and then other people just kind of do what the expectations are.
Yeah.
So this is not just for you, this is also for like future church staff and everything else to be in a good place.
Yep.
So that's enough of explaining why this is important. Let's get into it. Here's the first thing. For keeping tasks and people from falling through the cracks, you need a system to handle all your email. Now, this isn't a surprise because we've talked about this often.
Many times.
But people, again, pastors, because they're people, are bad at email. But that's not an excuse for us because email come from people and we exist to serve people.
Yeah.
And so we have to have something in place where people are being followed up with and responded to. It's interesting. Every once in a while, through Practical Church Planting and stuff, I'll email things with other pastors, and so things will be said, and somebody will say, like, there'll be an email exchange about something that's going on, or maybe some feedback I'm giving them, or something like that, and I won't hear anything for a couple days.
Yeah.
And then I'm like, if I don't hear anything within like 2 days, I know it's not coming.
Yeah.
And recently, somebody, we were email talking about something, and he said, I'm going to get back to you on this in a couple days, and immediately I thought, no, you're not, just because. If you're not going to get back on it now, you're probably not going to get back to it in a couple of days.
Yeah.
Now, I am a fan of Inbox Zero. And in fact, you can go back to episode 196 because we actually give you tips of how I do Inbox Zero, but also just on staying top of your email. Brian.
Yes, Dylan. What do you want to know?
You're not Inbox Zero.
No, I have gone back to Inbox Zero.
Well, I was going to say, because I don't know if you are or not, but like even if you have, it was probably a recent thing.
Yeah. Yes,
you though, are always respond to your emails. So for me, I can talk about Inbox Zero briefly for a second, but for someone who's not Inbox Zero, and I know most people aren't, what do you do?
So if you followed our Inbox Zero saga, I wasn't, and then I was working towards it, and then I discovered just hot tip from, I think it was from episode 196, that if you have like 1 million emails and want to get to Inbox Zero, you just archive everything. That's not that you're not currently working on, like all old stuff, which I did. And then I kind of let it get away, and then I was like checking my email one time while Dylan was sitting there. I was like, oh crap, he's gonna see. And so I got back to it. But so now it's pretty much down to zero. The only things I have in there is like stuff from over the weekend that needs to be responded to. But it's hard to stay on top of it if you don't. I mean, it's not like Inbox Zero is the only solution. Like there, whether it's writing things down or other tools we'll get to in a minute of like other task managers, things like transferring things over there. But it's just hard to stay on top of things if you let things pile up. And that's what it was for me when getting back to it. There's a lot of things that weren't things that like needed a response. Like, I'm even when it wasn't inbox zero, pretty good at just responding to email, but things that like didn't necessarily require a response, but required something for me to do on my end. That we're just letting pile up, and eventually it becomes a lot to do.
And that, I think, is the issue that we all run into.
Yeah.
So we won't get into all the things of it. Go to listen to episode 196 if you actually want to take care of your email, and it is a thing you can do. It's not like some theoretical thing. You can actually do it. But when you have a system, let's say inbox zero, or you only let a certain amount of things in your inbox, or you have a rule of like, I'm going to respond to everything within 24 hours unless it's the weekend or whatever. And then what happens, like for me, is it's oftentimes you get responses, something that you need to say no to and you feel bad, or something that requires like 5 minutes of work or looking up and you just don't feel like doing it. And so you're like, I'll do this later. And then you look at it again, I'll do this later. And by then it's like 2 or 3 days and you're like, it's probably not that important. So I just won't even do it. But the person that sent it to you is just waiting on it. So there just needs to be a system. Like this is one of the things where it's so easy. Like this to me is low hanging fruit of doing it. And to show you that this matters, back a couple weeks ago, we had a couple who flew from California, not for us, but they're looking to move to Raleigh. They had emailed me back in November saying, hey, we're coming to Raleigh. Could you give me some, I forget what it was. It was like some places, like we're in Raleigh or safe places to live. Or and I was like, this could take me forever. But I was like, I don't really know. And so I said, here are some general areas. And like, if you have anything specific, let me know. We emailed like 2 or 3 times and that was it. Well, they came in January. They came to New City, and he literally told me, it was a husband and wife, thank you for responding to my email. And he also said something to the effect of like, in a timely manner or quickly or whatever. Here's what I'm assuming happened. He emailed multiple pastors, because we're not a large church, so it's not like he somehow only found us. But I was probably one of the only people to respond, or at least to respond within like 2 or 3 days. Now, again, it's not that you have to respond to people that you don't know or anything like that. But if you're a church planner and somebody says, hey, we're interested in moving, like, you should do it. Now, again, here's what Inbox Zero helped me to do. I needed to respond that when I checked my email. I couldn't put it off till later because that's not how my system works. So it disciplines me to deal with the things that aren't urgent right there, but then they get pushed down the line because I don't have a process. So all that to say, you need to have a system of how you're going to respond to email, because people notice and people just know that pastors don't do that. So by responding to your email, people will be like, I can actually trust that I'll hear from you.
Yeah, and I would say you're I don't know if this is the right way to say it, but you're not immune to this. In other words, like I for a long time used unread email as
like a task
to-do list, pretty much, which everybody does, and which seems fine, and because obviously once you do it, it's essentially the same as checking it off. Once it's read, it's done. But once it gets past a certain point, like I don't know what the actual number is, say I don't know 5 or 10 or something like that. Once it gets to a certain length in your inbox, it's just easy to continue to ignore them. When there's 2, it's hard to ignore. Like when if there's 1 and a second one comes in, you notice it. But when you're used to seeing this block of unread messages, 1 or 2 added to it, it's easy to just kind of ignore, and then that continually grows. So even if you think this is like not an issue for you, I'm not saying it is, but I would definitely double check. Look at yourself again.
And I always tell people, I am not the most naturally organized person. So like if I can do this, other people can do it too. So I don't know if that's like, I promise you can do it.
But I think it helps for someone who's not naturally organized.
It does.
Because like you might be thinking, I'm not naturally organized, so I can't do this. But this is the solution to not being naturally organized.
Yeah, because you just have to deal with it. So episode 196 is more details, but just you need a system of handling all your emails so that people aren't followed up with. So that is what we would say. That's the first one. Number 2, I would encourage putting due dates on all of your tasks. Now, this was a 2020 revelation to me, I think, when I switched to Todoist. Todoist is what it's called. And they have this, basically, I like Todoist because like you can, like a lot of task managers, you can like put due dates on it. But Todoist is helpful because of how they do recurring tasks. Like some of them, like you click like I'm done, but it still stays in your upcoming tasks. It doesn't like move it to the next week. Todoist does. And so I have it set up for like automatic a 7-day rolling view. So if I have something due today, it's recurring. I click it and it's gone. But so one of the things that helped me was when I started using this Todoist thing and it had a 7-day rolling view, I had to put a due date on all my task lists. I couldn't just like say I need to get all these things done. And that was just to keep it up. And what I found was by putting a due date of when I'm supposed to do these tasks, I'm no longer wondering on which days I'm supposed to do what. So when I have my calendar and I have like, a time block for like tasks and emails or whatever, I know exactly what tasks I'm supposed to do because I have to put due dates on them. And then at the end of the day, which we'll talk about at the end of this episode, if I have tasks from that day that I didn't finish, I will move them to the next day or give them another due date so that they're not just like piling up and I have like past due tasks. And so this was an unintentional thing that I did, but for whatever reason was really helpful was I no longer just say I have to get X done, but I put a date on it and it lets me know, like prioritize when I'm supposed to do what.
And I like that of what to do with things you didn't get done, because it'll inevitably happen at some point where you don't get everything done you want to get done. But I think where these like systems start to fall apart is when you let those, it's similar to the email, is when you let those things go.
Yeah.
Because then once one thing is past due, you get used to seeing past due, and that's fine, and then things build up. And so having a system where like it's never going to be perfect, you're never going to be perfect at it. Sure I'm not, but having a system of what to do with those things that you miss or don't get to, whatever, is kind of what makes these systems work, I think.
Well, and again, it's just like email where you get used to seeing a bunch. And so what happens is like with email or with tasks, after a couple of days where we should have handled it, but we didn't, we begin to justify, like we know we should have, but we justify why it's okay that we didn't. And then if there's people involved, although we're justifying it, they're not, they're like, what's happening here? And so again, a lot of your tasks, whether they have to do with people or not directly have to do with people, if you're a pastor, it's indirectly going to affect them at some point. Like if you're organized and on top of things, that'll help everything move slowly. So there's an accidental stumble upon that happened for me that was really helpful. Just putting due dates on all your tasks and see if that helps a little bit.
Yeah, I think it just helps get things out of the way. Even if they don't have a due date, just putting something, it helps you not perpetually put things off.
And that's a good point, because a lot of these things, they don't necessarily have a due date. It's just like, I'm going to put it, and just like, well, as I'll talk about, I have to get my task list cleared by the end of the day. You know, with email, I have to deal with it because it's just like I've trained myself. And so my task list, I have to deal with it or I have to move it so it doesn't just kind of pile up.
And this is something that's used in all kinds of things. Like I'm just thinking, for example, like I do a lot of art counting here, and in QuickBooks, if you're familiar, this is something that they do is they put on running task lists, especially like we use QuickBooks Online, so it automates a lot of things, and so it's something where they'll have a due date, and if you don't do it, it'll continually say as not done. It doesn't, you have to address it. It's not going to address it for you, and so this isn't by any means some revolutionary thing. This is something that is used in all different areas of business and things, but I think we can in like ministry forget that those rules, if that's the right word, but apply to us as well.
So number 2, put due dates on all your tasks. Number 3, create a system of quickly tracking your thoughts and requests. So I don't know all the psychological stuff behind it. But basically there's a thing where if you think about something and you don't deal with it, it just sits in your brain and like uses mental energy. And so what you want to do is you want to find a way to get it out of your brain, especially if you're like doing something and you have an idea for something else, but you're not working on that right now. Instead of just sitting it in there and trying to remember it, you want to get it out of your brain as quick as you can and focus on what you're doing. And that also ensures that you don't forget about it. So there's 2 ways that I do this. People could do it various ways. One of the things is when people ask you to do something, you can tell them, especially if you're not in a place where you can write it down. For what I do, for example, is I ask people to email me. That way, it's not on me to remember it if I'm not in a place, especially if somebody is asking me to do something, which is not that you're above doing it, but if somebody's requesting something of you, especially like if you're the lead planter, like let's just say you're probably going to be over staff or whatever. So if somebody's asking something to you, you don't have to do it. I mean, you should probably do it, but it's not like you're going to lose your job, right? But in order to stay on top of it, you need to have a way to remember. So if somebody, for example, again, asks me to do something, I will often say, if I'm not in a place to write it down, I will often ask them to email it to me. And because I stay on top of my email, I will put it on my task list when I get the email or whatever, but it will be addressed. I would even say this happens like conversely too at staff. Sometimes I'll ask Brian or somebody to do something and they'll say to me, can you email it to me? Because they're also not in a place to write it down or whatever. And so that is one thing. If somebody asks you to do something, you can ask them to email it to you. As a side note, this is also just helpful when people in your church who are well-meaning have ideas and suggestions of what they want your church to do. And they like ask you after church on Sunday, you can say, hey, can you come up with a plan or whatever, and can you email it to me? And then we can talk about it more. You'll often find that people, because a lot of times people just want you to do stuff. They don't want to do it. It just sounds good. They won't even email you, and then you haven't done anything wrong because you asked them to do something. They didn't do it. And so it's not like it's on you to do everything. That's just a side thing. I don't know if that's helpful. So that's one thing that's helpful. The second thing, Todoist, my friend, you're on Todoist now.
I am. Yeah.
I think my wife's on Todoist now. She
Oh, really?
is, and she's like very organized. She works for a marriage ministry, and she likes it now, which is like the first tool that I've ever recommended that she uses because she's usually the one that's like, no, this isn't efficient. This isn't good.
Oh,
So anyway, Todoist, I don't know how it all works, but Command Shift A is changed my life. Where basically you download it onto your computer. If you're in the middle of a task and something pops up, I hit Command Shift A. Even as I'm even pressing this on the thing. I gotta say it.
Right.
You're watching the video, you can see me pretend to press Command Shift A, and this little box will pop up. It won't take you out of your browser or whatever you're doing, and you can just say what you have to do, and you can put a date on it. So I could say, actually, let's say I'm doing sermon prep or whatever, and something just pops in my mind. I'm not going to stop what I'm doing. I'm going to hit Command Shift A. Remind me to email Brian about X today, or tomorrow, or February 2nd, and it'll give you a due date. So without even doing anything, it'll automatically give you a due date, and it gets it out of your mind. And that helps you focus on what you're doing. And for me, I like it because I don't have to open anything.
Yeah.
And I always have a phone with me. They have an app on your phone, so you can do the same thing. But finding a place to quickly get rid of or to store your thoughts or your tasks without interrupting what you're doing is really helpful.
Yeah, and the cool thing about with Todoist is you can, it's smart. You can do like whatever, email Brian on Thursday. Like that's just what you type out. In other words, you don't have to open up like the little calendar view and click a date and due date and all that stuff.
Yep,
where if you just type it in plain English and it'll do it for you.
Yes.
Which is nice because, like you said, we've cycled through probably every task manager that exists here, but just trying them out, and some of them it's just like it's not the end. It sounds weird to say because it's not the end of the world. You can do it, but it just takes you out of whatever you're doing for so long to like open up another app or window or whatever, go to their sites and type it in and put on a due date and all these types of things. Where all in all, it probably takes maybe a minute and a half. Which in the grand scheme of things isn't a huge deal, but it takes you out of what you're doing for so long that it just takes even longer to get back into it. So for this, just to be able to put it in real quick, they just came out with a widget for the new iOS, whatever number we're on, 14, something like that. But to where I don't know if you use it or not, but where you can actually have on your home screen your little to-do list, which is cool because you're not if you're someone who's not always working in front of your computer, you can still have access to it without having to like go into a bunch of different apps, which I like.
So so again, create a system of quickly tracking thoughts and requests. So it's okay to say something like, "Hey, can you email me that?" As long as you're on top of your email, or if you're on your computer or something like that. You could use like a sticky note or whatever. It's just that you got to bring those with you.
Yeah.
And so having something digital is helpful because it's always accessible. But quickly getting thoughts and tasks, requests like out of your mind and focus on what you're doing can help you stay productive.
Yeah.
So that was number 3. Number 4, keep all tasks in one place. This also goes back to the email problem. Where we often use our email inbox as a task list, and then we might have a online software-based task list, and then we might have like a sticky note or like a paper and pen, like a little notebook, and then we have all this stuff in various places, and you can't remember where things are and where things go.
Yeah.
And so if everything's in one place, I use Todoist, but you can use whatever you want that you always have accessible. I mean, writing down by hand can be fine as long as you always have the thing with you.
Yeah.
Or let's say you prefer like having a little journal thing or whatever. At least having something on your phone or something if you're out where you can like jot it down, but then have a system of getting all that stuff where it is. It'll just help you have everything in one place, especially if everything has a due date. Then you always know what you have to do when. If you just try to rely on your memory, you'll forget about it, or you'll get frustrated, or your mind will be in multiple places trying to remember while you're doing another task.
Yeah.
Getting it all in one place is really helpful.
And this can especially come into or make things a lot easier if you're someone who, if you're watching this, if you're like bivocational or have more than one, gig or job, whatever, if you do side things, it can be real easy to kind of let these things, I don't know, like blend together, just get confused with where you're keeping things for each thing. So like I have a few different things that I do. And so if I kind of keep them all completely separate, sometimes it almost seems like that works better. Like keep all my stuff for this job over here and for, New City over here. But then if there's any time where I need to be working on one and I don't have it or working on the other, it's helpful to keep it all in one place as long as you have kind of a mental way of separating it. So not that this is like the perfect answer, or not that not that I like have the perfect answer for it, but I think just developing a system of how you're going to track these things. And like you said, if you're a person who likes to do things on pen and paper, which I've been in the past, but then I've been the culprit of having like 16 legal pads and I can't remember where something is written down on. But just knowing what that system is and kind of making it the standard across the board with whatever you're doing, it really helps kind of keep things streamlined for you.
Yep. So whatever that is, all tasks in one place. I feel like Todoist should pay us for being an ambassador or something because talk about it all the time.
That's right.
That's what I use. I guess Brian uses it as well, and just helpful. So whatever that looks like. Again, a lot of these things might seem small, but if you begin to train yourself to stay on top of them now, as things get more complex, you'll be in a much better position than trying to scramble because you've hurt people because things have fallen through the cracks when they could have been avoided. Again, you're not going to do this perfectly, but it's going to significantly reduce the issues you run into if you start to train yourself to have a process on staying top of things.
Yeah, and I'll say from experience, like especially if you're planting a church, doing something at the beginning will make it so much easier down the road. Because I've been involved, like I've worked in different places outside of church, and going into like a place that's established, like we're not starting something from scratch, and it is tough if the whole organization is just everyone. Like some people are on top of things, some people aren't, and people are kind of doing things their own way. To then come in and try and like not only have your own way of doing things, but not really knowing who's going to be on top of things, who isn't, and it's tough for a brand new person to come in. And so if you get this stuff under control now, then as you bring in people down the road, it'll be a lot easier for them to sort of assimilate into your system rather than having to figure out what works and what doesn't because what you're doing isn't working.
Yeah. So that's good. So yeah, number 5?
Yep.
Keep all your tasks in one place. Part of this is, New City's been around for 4 years, so we've tried a lot of things. So if some of this might seem like overwhelming, how do you figure it out? You just do it. It's like we talk about, when it comes to social media and church use, it's like we don't know what to do, so we don't do anything. It's like, no, you got to do something so you can figure out how to get better.
Yeah.
A lot of this will become habitual and second nature. Starting it might seem kind of intimidating, but if you start small, again, if you have less going on, it's a lot easier to build into it as things get bigger.
Yep.
So keep all your tasks in one place. Number 6, schedule out your entire day. This probably seems very unspiritual, and just generally speaking, Christian or workplace or whatever, I think there's this pushback to it that if I schedule out my entire day, or at least my entire work day, pretty much down to the minute or whatever, then it's restrictive. And especially in a ministry context, well, what if something comes up and I can't meet with people? And then we can't be effective. And so it's funny. The opposite of that seems to be not to schedule anything and just kind of go with the flow.
Yeah.
It reminds me a little bit of like CrossFit. So I'm not a part of CrossFit, but we all know that CrossFit has this, and sometimes rightly, given to it, this like if you're a CrossFit, you're crazy and like you're like super healthy, and then you have all these reasons why it's bad for you. Like people are like, well, it's bad for your joints and it's bad for your hips, or you could get injured. And stuff like that to me is funny because it's like you have a group of people who take fitness really, they value it a lot, and so they're very strict and rigid and just like habitual in how they do it. People who don't like that and aren't exercising like at all, we'll talk about how like the potential negative side effects of it, and then we'll do nothing.
Yeah, right.
Instead of like also being, scheduled and disciplined when it comes to working out, we'll just say why you shouldn't do CrossFit, but they don't give you a solution of what you should do instead. Yeah. And I think this can happen the same way when we talk about like scheduling out your entire day. It might feel restrictive or like you can't do certain things but what's the alternative? So for example, Cal Newport in his book Deep Work was one of my all-time favorite books. He talks about this a lot of like blocking out your day and learning how to work deep. It's really helpful, especially for knowledge workers, which if you're in ministry, that's what you are.
You are.
And so with COVID, I did this really well before COVID, and then COVID happened, and it just like I started scheduling like half my day, and then about like a month ago, I was like, I need to get back on. And I've been doing it. It's been really helpful. And so what this looks like for me is I have certain things that I do like every day pretty much. And so those are recurring. But then the day before, and we'll talk about this with the last point, the day before my work day or the night before, I will schedule whatever gaps I have for my entire day. So what happens there is I'm always doing something. What's interesting is that not only am I always having something to do and I'm not having to waste mental energy of what do I do next because it's already been decided, I often get my things done quicker because I know there's a time limit to it.
Yeah.
And we've talked about this in sermon prep about like giving yourself, I know this sounds unspiritual, but it's just worked for me. I don't know. Giving yourself like a certain amount of time to study and sermon prep and then sticking within it. Of course, there are times where it takes longer, but you'll actually find that those are far and few between. But scheduling out your entire day so you know exactly what you're doing. It's okay if things get pushed around or if you get stuck in something and you don't want to, your calendar has, you're moving on to the next item at 11 and it's 10:58 and you're in a groove, like it's fine to keep doing it.
Right.
But you know what you're doing. At the end of the day, you can actually look back on your day and see what you've done, because a lot of times you feel like, did I accomplish anything? And it just helps you decide ahead of time what you're going to do so that you can do it. So I would encourage scheduling out your entire day, and before you say it feels weird, just try it and see what happens.
Yeah, I've heard the term long ago, and I think that if I remember, I think this is the term. But being flexibly rigid, where like, I mean, and I'm sure if you're someone who wants to like push back on this point, you're gonna have reasons to come up with of
Right.
why not to, and sometimes it can be legitimate, and sometimes honestly it can be illegitimate, not legitimate, whatever. But there inevitably sometime in your life there will be something that comes up where you need to move your schedule around,
Right.
and that's fine. But in the times where that's not happening, being rigid with your schedule is really helpful. So I don't know. I think the main pushback to this in ministry is like, what if someone calls you and they have an emergency and they need to meet right away, and it's like, meet if it's an actual emergency. But that I guess in our context, maybe someone watching this will disagree, but I mean, you can disagree with me if you want, but I don't think that happens necessarily every single week. You know, I mean, it's just maybe it happens sometimes, but it's not something that is the norm where we need to not have a schedule because we're worried about that happening. If it happens, then you can do it and then rearrange your schedule the next day to accommodate. And so I think being flexibly rigid, where you are rigid with your schedule, and what that means most of the time is just when you're alone and when you're dealing with your own things, and that doesn't really involve other people, because a lot of times we are working by ourselves. I don't know, I just think it's helpful.
And it can be, you can feel bad because in ministry, you might have a more flexible schedule than other people,
True.
Especially if you're trying to meet with them or whatever. And so you feel like whenever everyone else is available, that's when I'll do it. But you have to, preach. You have stuff that you have to do for the church to be healthy. So you need to be in a good space and a productive space. And so what I recommend oftentimes is when you're offering to meet with someone, or someone asks to meet with you, give them like 3 or 4 time slot options. Most of the time they'll make it work, or they'll choose one of those. And if not, there can be exceptions for it. But it's okay to kind of schedule and guard your time and doing things that are most helpful for your church, and not just kind of whenever anybody needs you, then you go and do it. So.
Yeah, and I remember hearing an older pastor talk about this I don't know, last year or something like that. But in talking about like how to respond when people ask to meet with you or your help and things like that, it's kind of a case by case thing. Like if I'm sure there may be a time where someone contacts you and is like, I need to meet right now, and here's the reason, and it's like, okay, you do need to meet right now. I will drop everything. But the example he gave is he's like, and he said he'd had this happen before, where someone would contact him and be like, I need to meet with you right now. I'm really struggling with a porn issue, with an issue of looking at porn. He's like, okay, how long has this been going on? It's like 2 years. It's like, it's an issue clearly, but it's if we meet tomorrow, it'll be okay. Like, don't hold off one day, and so you kind of, everything doesn't have to be you drop everything to accommodate everybody else, even though that does sound mean, and obviously you wouldn't want to like say that to somebody. But I don't know, there's other things that you're doing that are very important. And so
we have a fear of, like, for example, we check our email probably, a lot of us check our email more than we should, because we feel like if somebody says something, we got to respond right away. And what the reality of the situation is, people don't need a response right away. They just need to know that they'll be responded to. So it's okay if you check your email twice a day, let's say, and people know, hey, when I email this person, they're not going to respond in 20 minutes, but they're going to respond in a certain amount of time. I don't know if that's helpful, but schedule your entire day. Just try it. And then when you get to lunch, let's say, things are moving around, you can edit it, but just see what you have to do. And it'll also, I think, show you that you can get a lot more done than you think you can, as opposed to just like taking a bunch of breaks throughout the day, wondering what to do next if you're already intentional about what you should do.
Yeah, and if you want to address some of these issues we already talked about, then scheduling in things like catching up with your email. So, it doesn't always have to be just like appointments or sermon prep, but things that'll help you be more efficient are things that you can schedule as well.
That's right. Yeah, and that's really good about emails. Like, I have this a lot of time. I'm going to check it. I'm not going to check it till then, so I'm not going to get distracted, and then I'm going to work just on it so I can get to my 0 or whatever I do, and then move on to the next thing. So schedule a check. And then number 6, use a shutdown routine. So this is also something I got from Gal Newport's book, Deep Work. Whenever I read it originally, and it was really helpful, where at the end of the day, I have a process of what I'm going to be done, or what I'm going to do to finish the day, so that I can prepare for the next day. So I have this written down because I couldn't remember off the top of my head. I have 5. Here's what my shutdown routine looks like at the end of each workday to help me be like done for the day and ready to go the next day. My 5 things are, I get my inbox to 0. So, I'll check email a couple of times, schedule times throughout the day. One of them's at the end of the day. So I'll get it to inbox 0. So again, I have a process of doing that. I will then check my task list. Did I finish everything? Or is there anything on there that I didn't do that I need to reschedule for another due date? The third thing I'll do is I'll fill in my next day calendar. So if there's any gaps that I haven't, put on my calendar for the next day for the working hours, I do that. I make the decision of what I'm going to do. The fourth thing I do is I close all the tabs in my web browser, because I always have a million open. And I'm not the most organized person, so if I don't do this every day, I'll just have things open all over the place.
Yeah.
So I completely close down all of my tabs. This is something that's helpful for me. It might not be helpful for you. And then the fifth thing I do is I kind of organize my office. I'm not the most clean and organized person, so things could just kind of sit. So I take like 5 minutes and just put everything back, so that the next day when I come in, I know what I'm going to do. I'm like, the office is clean. I don't have a million web browsers open, and so I'm super distracted. My task list is set, and so I have it's like 30 minutes. Again, at the end of my day, it just says shutdown, and I go through this and I finish everything up, and that can just help you. I mean, he talks about it in the book, but it can help you say, okay, I'm done here, so now I can focus on my family or whatever else I have going on in the evening, and not feel like I always have to be working. I'm going to work really hard, and I'm going to schedule my day, and I'm going to be productive when I'm working, and then when I'm not working and I'm with people or with my family, I'm not going to be like on my email or on social media or doing all these things all the time, being super distracted.
I don't like the advice of closing all your web tabs. I do the same thing. If I just have an idea, like something unrelated to work, open a thing and type it in, and I'd never want to part with it, and it'll sit there forever.
Yes.
And so this isn't something. Honestly, this isn't something I do in like an official way. So it's something that I need to learn from and do, because this is good. Because especially if you're someone who works from a laptop, I'll just harp on that singular one, because that's something that affects me. If you work on a laptop and you take your laptop home and open it, and there's work sitting there, it's real hard to, even if you're doing it for something unrelated to work, it's hard to detach your brain from work. And I think that's a really healthy thing.
If your email inbox that was at 0 when you left the day is the first thing you open, and you have emails, you're going to be thinking about it.
That's true. Yeah, and especially in ministry, it's very, obviously, I think we all agree, but it's very healthy to not take work home with you every day, and sometimes that's hard. And so if that's the first thing you open it is, and obviously there's times you can work from home. I'm not saying that, but like if you're opening it and not planning to work, but then your mind immediately goes to work or goes to things like wherever you are in sermon prep, or a response that you feel like, oh, maybe I need to do this tonight instead of tomorrow, then you're immediately taking away from time that maybe should have been scheduled, or maybe should have been planned to spend with your family, and spending it at work. So yeah, it's
really helpful too. Again, if you know and you have a plan of when you're going to do certain work things, it doesn't stress you out. So I encourage people not to have email on their phone. Generally speaking, there's different reasons why you might have to, but I don't have email on my phone, and it doesn't stress me out, because I know there are 3 times throughout the day that I'm going to check my email, and if somebody emails me, they know they're going to get responded to. It might not be in the next hour, but their request is going to be, responded to, because I have it planned out. And so having a routine that can help you. Now, the whole point of this episode is not to say you have to do these things. I think the whole point for me, this episode is maybe some of these things would be helpful, and maybe to think through for you to be proactive and intentional of what can I do to stay on top of things, so that my tasks and people aren't falling through the cracks, instead of always feeling bad that it happened after the fact.
Yeah.
Now, again, a lot of this stuff might seem like a lot if you're brand new to it. This was developed over time of trying things. And so, again, just try something. Maybe implement one of these or 2 of these at first, and kind of create a rhythm or a habit of doing it, and then you can add other things. But I always say, don't just assume that if you don't have a process for any of this stuff, don't just assume that you're going to stay on top of it, because experience with a lot of people, a lot of pastors that I have had experience with, don't do this. And I'm not saying I'm great and they're awesome, because everyone has strengths and weaknesses, and so there's a lot of weaknesses that I have that are strengths of other people. But this is one of the things that's helpful, is just, do you have a process of keeping things up to date? My mom always said when I was a kid that it takes so little to be above average. And for example, staying on top of your email, because people don't do it, it's so little, but it's so above average if you can do it.
Yeah.
And I don't know, just don't buy into the lie that ministry is always busy. We have talked about some various episodes, and there's always overwhelming. Like, if we have processes in place of when we're going to handle things, it doesn't have to be this, I'm always stressed out and life is always horrible, that we can sometimes make it seem like it is.
Yeah, I think we all know of people in our church that are, especially as your church goes on a little bit, that are notoriously unresponsive. And I think we're for the most part, I think we're pretty quick to give them excuse
Right.
for it, which is fine. Like right now, for instance, this is January, and every year we send out an email to all of we call them partners or members, just basically asking like, do you want to continue as a partner for the upcoming year? And we've been doing this for a few years, and so by now there's a good handful of people that we sent out week 2 weeks ago, week and a half ago, something like that at recording this, that haven't responded, and I kind of expected them not to respond because whatever reason, I just kind of gotten used to the fact that these people aren't very good at responding to email, which is fine. I mean, everyone knows people like that, but as their pastor, leader, shepherd, whatever you want to call, that's not a good reputation for you to have.
Yeah.
Like I would just say if this isn't something you should necessarily expect from everybody, and it's not like it's a huge issue if someone it doesn't have maybe like a public facing career job or something like that, but you do, and you have people that are following you and that depend on you, and so I feel like this is something that maybe other people we can give a little bit of a pass to, maybe, but as a pastor, I don't think this is something that you can give yourself a pass to, quote unquote.
Yeah.
I think it's something you need to be on top of.
Yeah. So those are 6 tips for keeping tabs of people from falling through the cracks. Hopefully they're helpful. And if you want more tips and advice, not only should you subscribe to this podcast, but if you're on Facebook, check out the Practical Church Planting Facebook group.
That's right.
And you can connect with hundreds of other pastors who are asking questions and trying to figure this thing out.
Just like you.
So thanks for being with us, and we'll be with you next time on Practical Church Planting.